So today we are going to talk about the Pterygopalatine Fossa, right? It's a small bony space in the skull and it's pyramidal shape. So what I will do, I will draw the Pterygopalatine Fossa here first, and then I will tell you what are the neighboring structure so that you develop the orientation that Pterygopalatine Fossa is exactly present where in the head. So first of all, Pterygopalatine Fossa is a sort of pyramidal space, right? This is its supposed face, anterior side. This is the top of the fossa. This is the back of the fossa, right? And it's a paired structure. There's one Pterygopalatine Fossa on the right side of the skull, and of course there's one on the left side. Here I'm drawing the right side of the skull. Now, the first question is this Pterygopalatine Fossa, right? A space in the bones of the skull, where it is exactly located. What is the exact position in head and neck, right? Let me draw some familiar structure which everyone knows. For example, orbit. Here is your orbit. All of you know what is orbit, and it houses the eyeball and related structures. Now, first thing which you can see in this diagram, that Pterygopalatine Fossa is basically just inferior to the apex of the orbit, right? This is this area, the back of the orbit. This is called apex of the orbit. Pterygopalatine Fossa is just below the apex of the orbit. Secondly, here in front, there is a bone. You must be loving this bone because it has teeth and helps you to chew a lot of things. What is this? Maxilla. So second important information which I will love to give you, that this Pterygopalatine Fossa, it is just on the back of the maxilla. Which part of the maxilla? Of course, it's behind the upper part of the maxilla and inner side of the maxilla. Supromedial part of the maxilla. It is behind the supromedial part of the maxilla. Then other important relationships before we go into detail. What is here? Anterior cranial fossa. And what's here? Yes, this is middle cranial fossa, right? And this is, yes, this is sphenoid bone, body of the sphenoid bone here, and this is pterygoid process. Right? Now you can see that basically this fossa is below the apex of the orbit, behind the maxilla, especially behind the supromedial part of the maxilla, and it is antero-inferior to the middle cranial fossa. It's very strategically located, right? And of course, it's just anterior to the pterygoid process of the sphenoid bone. Is that right? Now, let's define it. What is Pterygopalatine Fossa? Pterygopalatine Fossa is a small bony space, right? Space bounded by the bony structures on the lateral side of the skull. It is placed just below the apex of the orbit, just behind the supromedial part of the maxilla, and antero-inferior to the, what is this? Middle cranial fossa, just in front of the pterygoid process of the sphenoid bone. You know exactly what is. Now you know its relationship with the orbit, you know its relationship with the maxilla, you know its relationship to the middle cranial fossa, and of course here is your, what is here? Process. Here is your, yes, pharynx, nasopharynx. You know its relationship to the nasopharynx. Nasopharynx is postero-inferior. And if you go purely inferior, what is this? This is oral cavity. Oral cavity. So what are important relationship? That above it has apex of the orbit, in front it has maxilla, on the postero-superior angle it has middle cranial fossa, behind it has pterygoid process, and if you really look at the angle postero-inferior, it is directed towards nasopharynx. Is that right? And if you go below purely from this, you will end up in the oral cavity. Am I clear? Now, it has very important and intimate relationship with the nose also, and infratemporal fossa. So let me draw one more diagram. I will draw one more diagram where I will show its relationship with the infratemporal fossa and the nose, right? Look at it You have a, okay, here are your big ears, right? And big smile, just for orientation. Here happens to be your nose. It happens to be your nose, right? Nasal cavity. This is not very, now on the side there are eyes, of course. What is the relationship of pterygopalatine fossa with the nose? Actually, it is on the side of the, let me tell you exactly where it is. Yes. Yes, right pterygopalatine fossa and left pterygopalatine fossa, and it is present on the sides of the nose, but where? On the side of the posterior deep part of the nose. Of course, not on the front of the nose, on the back, right? In the nasal cavity, right? When you go enter in nasal cavity and you move posteriorly, right? Very posteriorly on the right and left, pterygopalatine fossa is there, right? It means pterygopalatine fossa on its medial wall. This is its medial wall. This is in close relationship with nasal cavity. Its medial walls are in close relationship with the nasal cavity. And if you look on the side, okay, I think ears have been displaced too much down. No problem. These are mobile ears. And here on this side, this is infratemporal fossa. Here is your temple, isn't it?
That's right.
Here is your temple. And below the temple, here is infratemporal, this area. This is infratemporal fossa. I will not go into anatomical detail of infratemporal fossa. That will have in another lecture. But right now you just stressed me on the sides of the, on this side, right? On the lateral side of what is this? Pterygopalatine fossa, there is infratemporal fossa. Right? Now, why I am making this diagram? Because I want to make it clear to you that medially it can communicate with nose, nasal cavity, and laterally it is open to infratemporal fossa. Right? Now you have the three-dimensional image of pterygopalatine fossa. Come here, please. Yes. So you can make like this. These are two. Yeah, these are two pterygopalatine fossa. I will come on this side. Right? This is the right pterygopalatine fossa. This is the left pterygopalatine fossa. Now you will tell me the structure. At the top, what is this? Orbit. Right? In front, maxilla. These two are maxilla. At the top there are orbit. Inside, nasal cavity. Very good. Outside, infratemporal fossa. And behind, above, middle cavity fossa. Is that right? Now we'll talk about the bones which are present in this relationship. Have a seat.
Thank you.
Now we'll talk about the bony boundaries. It's very simple. What are the boundaries of this fossa? First of all, this part of, what is this? Maxilla. This is in front, anterior boundary. Anterior boundary is made by what? Maxilla. Now if I look at the maxilla from the back, right, let me make a very simple diagram of maxilla. Right, this is top of maxilla, right, this is the lateral side, and this is the back of maxilla, posterior side of maxilla, right. Now actually fossa is present at this position, right. So it means this part of the maxilla is in relationship with the fossa. This part of maxilla make the anterior wall of the pterygopalatine fossa. Now what is this part? This is supromedial part of posterior wall of maxilla or infratemporal wall of the maxilla. Am I clear to everyone?
Yes.
Of course I'm drawing the right side, right? So this is the anterior wall. So we can make it that anterior wall of pterygopalatine fossa is made by the which part of the maxilla? This. Supromedial part of the posterior wall of the maxilla or infratemporal wall of the maxilla. And this is the top, front. Now at the top, upper boundary. Now here is the body of sphenoid bone. medially, and laterally the greater wing of sphenoid. Now, top of it is made by the top structure here. This is the body of sphenoid, bone. So in front there is maxilla. At the top, what is this? Body of sphenoid. Now we go to the behind. Behind it is another part of the sphenoid bone. You know, sphenoid bone has body of sphenoid, lesser wing of sphenoid, greater wing of sphenoid, right? So, and below that, let me make a very simple diagram of sphenoid bone. This is sphenoid bone. These are lesser wings. On the sides, these are greater wing. We are looking from the front. We are looking from the front to the sphenoid bone. Now, sphenoid bone, here it has structure which is going down. These two structure, right structure and left structure, these are called pterygoid processes of sphenoid bone. What are these? Pterygoid processes of sphenoid bone. Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
Anyone who is confused? Okay. So what is this? These pterygoid processes of sphenoid bone, they are just on the back of this fossa. Let me make it more clear that here is body of sphenoid, and behind it, this is going down. What is it? Pterygoid process of sphenoid bone. So here in this diagram, you can see pterygoid process of sphenoid bone. Here, this is pterygoid process of which bone? Sphenoid bone. Is that right? Now again, front is the maxilla, above is the body of the sphenoid, and behind it has pterygoid process of sphenoid bone with adjacent part of greater wing of sphenoid, right? With adjacent part of interior face of the adjacent part of greater wing of sphenoid. Now I will ask you the question. Interior boundary. Yes, all of you say. Supramedial part of maxilla. Say loudly. Roof is made by body of sphenoid bone and posterior wall is made by pterygoid process of sphenoid bone with adjacent part of the greater wing of sphenoid of its interior wall. Is it clear? Any question up to this? Now, bottom. Actually, bottom become narrow because maxilla is trying to approach the pterygoid. So you can say it become like this, and from here it become like that. But there is something that is closing this bottom. I will tell you what is this something. There's a piece of bone here, right? Actually, maxilla is going backward, slanting backward, pterygoid processes downward and little forward, and while they are approaching each other, there's a little gap which is closed by a bone, and I will tell you exactly what is that bone, because sometimes students get confused, and that bone has very, very tricky, special relationship with the pterygopalatine fossa, right? I will make the lateral wall of the nose, and in the lateral wall of the nose, a bone called palatine bone, right, is very important. Now let me make the palatine bone of right side, and this is a perpendicular plate of palatine bone on the right side, and this is nasal septum, right? Right nasal cavity, left nasal cavity. It has a lot of other bones, but I'm only showing which bones? Palatine bone. This is right palatine bone, L shape, and this is left palatine bone. Is that right? Now, these two palatine bones, okay, let me make them with that letter. This is perpendicular plate of palatine bone. This one is perpendicular plate of palatine bone, and this is horizontal plate of palatine bone, right? Now, right and left palatine bones. Now, what is the relationship of these two bones with the pterygopalatine fossa? Pterygopalatine fossa is exactly Now, you can see this is the medial side of the pterygopalatine fossa. This is also medial side of the pterygopalatine fossa. And boundary, what bone is on the medial side? Perpendicular plate of palatine bone, upper part of the perpendicular plate of the palatine bone. Yes. Right? So medial wall of this fossa is made by the upper part of the perpendicular plate of palatine bone. I will make it again this structure so it becomes more clear. Let me draw the one fossa, other fossa, right? Here I will make perpendicular plate, now you can see that this is the fossa, right? This is the medial side of the fossa. Medial side of the fossa is bounded by the upper part of the perpendicular plate of palatine bone. Of course, here is the nasal cavity, here is the septum, right? Now, this palatine bone here, it has a very special process which is going laterally, and this process is called pyramidal process. What is it called? Pyramidal process. And here also this pyramidal process, right? Now this pyramidal process on this side, this is the pyramidal process. It is moving outward, and it is just below the pyramidal process of palatine bone is just making floor of pterygopalatine fossa. And this structure, this one, what is this? This is pyramidal process of palatine bone. It is the pyramidal process of palatine bone, right? Because it is coming and moving laterally, and in front is the maxilla, and behind there is pterygoid process, and maxilla and pterygoid process are filled by the gap between them is filled by the pyramidal process of palatine bone. Am I clear? So how the floor of this fossa is made? Rapidly. Pyramidal process of palatine bone, but it is a very narrow floor, as maxilla, lower part of the maxilla, back of the maxilla and pterygoid process, they approach each other. So this gap is filled by the pyramidal process of palatine bone. Plus palatine bone also make medial wall of the pterygopalatine fossa. Am I clear? Is it clear? Yes. Another thing here, this pterygopalatine, this palatine bone, this palatine bone has two processes like this at the top. One process, okay, I'll make it like this, and here now actually there is one process moving like this and other is like that, and here was the pyramidal. Is that right? This is perpendicular plate and this was horizontal plate. This is orbital process and this is sphenoidal process. Palatine bone, because if I show the palatine bone here, I remove the fossa totally, you can see the palatine bone is somewhat like this. You understand? This is palatine bone looking at you, right? Which part of the palatine bone? Perpendicular plate, upper part. It has one orbital surface and it has one sphenoidal. Now, if you look at this, in between these two parts, orbital and sphenoidal, there is a depression. There is a depression. This is orbital process, this is sphenoidal process, and there is a notch. And at the top, what was there? Body of sphenoid. And this hole, this gap is called sphenopalatine foramen. What is this called? Sphenopalatine foramen. Sphenopalatine foramen is present in the medial wall of pterygopalatine fossa, and it is communicating the fossa with the nasal cavity. Am I clear? Yes. Any confusion?
Sir, how pterygopalatine fissures are?
I will go to pterygopalatine fissure also, right? Just 1 minute. So is it clear? Now, let's make the structure from the front again to make some more orientation. Now, what was this bone here on this side? Am I clear? And this is nasal septum. Okay. Now this here, I told you there was a foramen. What was this? Foramen. Sphenopalatine. Here was orbital process and here was sphenoidal. Here was orbital and here was sphenoidal. And below, if you look at this, what was this foramen here? Sphenopalatine. And this fossa helped this pterygopalatine, this foramen, to communicate with nasal cavity. Am I clear? Anyone has any question? A simple diagram, this can be shown like this. Very simple. That here is your nasal cavity, and what is this? Pterygopalatine fossa, and this opening. Yes, now you should be. What are these openings? Sphenopalatine foramen. Okay. Now another thing. On lateral side, what was here? This was infratemporal fossa. Now, actually, the wall laterally is deficient. In front there was maxilla, behind there was pterygoid process. Below, this gap is filled by this process, but upper part, this gap is left open. This open area on the lateral side, you understand it? Lateral. Communicate with the infratemporal fossa. Is that right? This open crack or fissure from the lateral side of the pterygopalatine fossa more laterally is open or communicating with the infratemporal fossa. Right? It means this area is open to infratemporal fossa. Now, this area which opens laterally into infratemporal fossa, it is bounded posteriorly by the pterygoid process and anteriorly by the maxilla. So it's called pterygomaxillary fissure. What is it called? Pterygomaxillary fissure. So we can say that, yes, please come here. Let's make it like this. Okay. Now this is right side. I'm holding the right pterygopalatine fossa. Is that right? In my case here, deep. Right. Here, please relax. From here it open into infratemporal fossa. In front there is maxilla and behind there is pterygoid process. So it's pterygomaxillary fissure communicating infratemporal fossa with the pterygopalatine fossa. And here there is a little hole on the medial side. This is a little hole. What is this? Sphenopalatine fossa. It is communicating where? It is not sphenopalatine fossa, it's sphenopalatine foramen. Please correct me, I'm a little lost man. Okay. So these medial and lateral wall are clear? Front wall, what are the main structure in the front? Maxilla, and behind pterygoid process and middle cranial fossa. Right? Now I will go into further detail of the structure. Please, thank you. So, now we can say that pterygopalatine fossa is a small bony space on the lateral side of the skull, interiorly bounded by the back of the maxilla, posteriorly bounded by the front of the pterygoid plate, superiorly bound by the undersurface of sphenoid body. Laterally it is open through pterygomaxillary fissure into infratemporal fossa. Right? Okay. I will again go to basic diagram. Orbit.